so much going on. So Ethiopia has a national election June 1st, I believe. You talked about Somaliland as well. Obviously, Israel recognized Somaliland, became the first country to recognize Somaliland in late December, I believe. Ethiopia is pushing for Red Sea access. And then at the same time, you have the Israelis now essentially in Somaliland. They've appointed their ambassador. He's not going to be a resident ambassador. But this has obviously turned a lot of Arab countries, not just against Somaliland, but also against Ethiopia. And Egypt is sort of leading this anti-Ethiopian coalition of sorts, I think we can call it. How dangerous of a moment and how much of a threat do you see that as for Ethiopia? And obviously the backdrop is that Ethiopia and Egypt, they've had a fallout over the Grand Renaissance Dam, but they've never agreed on how to handle the water levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've kind of put your finger on it. There are multiple overlapping, stresses within this region, right? And there are some underlying issues like the GERD issue and what I would call the freshwater issue, because now there's a saltwater issue between Ethiopia and Egypt as well, right? Egypt has clearly stated recently that it doesn't believe that Ethiopia should have Red Sea access, or at least military access on the Red Sea, and so I think this is a complicated issue. You have, as I said before, countries like Israel basically pursuing an aggressive set of interests in the Red Sea by recognizing Somaliland. I think we cannot ignore the kind of background role that the UAE plays in its support of Israel in doing that. There was a lot of speculation that UAE would be the next country to recognize Somaliland. That hasn't happened, but UAE essentially has its own air bases in the region already as well. So the introduction of Gulf states into the Horn, and perhaps being instrumentalized in ways, I think has complicated Horn politics, and creates a very dangerous moment. Like I said, I don't know what, if we need to fear at this moment a kind of open conflict between these kind of middle powers. But I think what we have seen, certainly in the course of the Sudan war, for example, is, and even in Ethiopia, is an ability to use proxies. And so while we might not see Egypt and UAE squaring off, or Egypt and Israel squaring off in indirect conflict, what we are seeing is growing proxy battles among these middle powers, and they all have their proxies. I mean, that is one of the reasons that makes the Horn of Africa, I think, such an unstable place over time, is the militia, the use of militias and proxy forces. Again, these are poor countries with high rates of unemployment, where the demographics are not against stability, given the high youth unemployment rates in these countries. And so I think there's an opportunity to use proxies in a very dangerous way. And so I have a great fear that could be an eventual outcome if the United States and others doesn't help to manage this growing competition among these states. I think the real threat here is that you see kind of blocs forming and a kind of Cold War or no peace, no war outcome, where you have a kind of Turkish, Egyptian, Eritrean bloc forming, and a UAE, Israeli, Ethiopian bloc forming inside of this region, and you see a real bifurcated set of interests playing out through proxies and through other competitive means that makes this an unstable region, not just in the Horn of Africa, but even spreading into the Red Sea for many years to come.
And on that, one of the big risks for Tigray specifically, we mentioned that Ethiopia has an election in early June. I believe Tigray is one of the regions that actually won't be able to participate in the election. And just in the last few weeks, we've essentially had, um, new leadership, the old leadership, reinstated without sort of a mandate from the federal government. So it seems to me that we're in a very, very dangerous situation in Tigray at the moment, and it's surprising that a conflict has not occurred yet. What do you think? What do you think are some of the conversations happening in Addis Ababa at the moment with regards to Tigray? And is it also possible that part of the reason why fighting hasn't broken out is because of the situation with the Strait of Hormuz? Because obviously going to war and protecting your territory requires access to energy as well.
Yes. Well, I think you're right to point out that Tigray is right now, I think, a growing concern inside of Ethiopia and for the broader region, because I think it could be the spark that sets fire to much of the region. Quite frankly, it's not going to be, the last Tigray conflict in 2000. It was essentially confined, more or less, to Ethiopia. Obviously, Eritrea was an active participant in that, crossing the border into Tigray. But I think this time
Hence the
around, they're going.
sanctions on Eritrea as well, right?
Exactly. This time around, I don't think a Tigray conflict will be confined to Ethiopia. I think you're going to see, again, whether it's through direct action or proxies, you're going to see a much more pronounced role from Eritrea, from Egypt, from Sudan, from the UAE, possibly from Saudi Arabia on one side or the other. So I don't think that the conflict in Tigray is going to be limited. I think one of the things that has held it back, quite frankly, is the role of outside actors. I know that, for example, it's been rumored for a long time that the UAE has asked Addis to show some restraint. There were moments in the spring and fall of last year where Abiy Ahmed was using, I think, really strident language about retaking the Red Sea. He was using very strident language about Tigray,
Assad
and
specifically, right? As well.
exactly about Assad, and that didn't boil over. And I think that there was, there were moments where outside actors, not the United States, ironically, but outside actors, I think, weighed in with the Ethiopians and asked not for them not to kind of pursue that agenda at that time. That doesn't mean that outside actors are going to be a break on conflict in Tigray. And I think the Tigray issue right now is I view it in kind of two ways. One is the Tigrayans themselves. They're obviously agitating, as you said, reappointing the former government right now. There will be a flashpoint around elections. That is clear. Those are coming up in just a matter of weeks. And, the absence of Tigray from that vote, I think, is going to, create new tensions. Whether or not they feel empowered to move forward, whether or not they're getting a push from Eritrea to, ignite the flames inside of Ethiopia is a question, or whether Egypt is also pushing on them, or whether they're getting a green light from General Burhan in Sudan. These are all going to factor into how far the Tigrayans believe that they can push, the Abiy government right now, and whether the time is right to make a new play to open up that conflict. I think the thing that concerns me is, again, the outside actors like the United States and the European Union that were decisive in bringing about the Pretoria Agreement don't seem to be playing the same role of peacemaker and peace builder in the region right now. Again, how does a choice by the United States to recognize and to remove the sanctions on Eritrea, how does that factor into Tigrayan thinking about restarting a conflict? Or how does that factor into Abiy's thinking about the threat posed by Eritrea? These are the kinds of second order effects that I've been talking about that are going to have real world implications in perhaps a matter of weeks as various actors on the ground, make calculations about how to advance and achieve their interests at this moment, and whether or not restarting conflict in Tigray is the right move at this time. They're going to factor in the kind of diplomatic architecture that exists to de-escalate these issues. They're going to look at the military posture of all of the neighboring states and whether they're going to play a role either in trying to mediate or in inciting a conflict. So all of those factors are being weighed by all of the different actors right now as we speak. And I think that without kind of an international role, whether that's the United States or the African Union or the Arab League, or there are a number of different groups that could be weighing in to shine a light on the heightened state of risk and insecurity in this region, but none of them are really doing that right now. And I think in the absence of that, you are essentially giving a kind of tacit green light to the forces of instability to pursue their agendas. And I think that's the real risk right now.